Your 40s are the decade you finally feel like you made it. The raise came through. The house is yours. The job has a real title now, and a paycheck bigger than your 20s could have imagined. And that quiet sense that you are finally safe is the most dangerous thing about this stretch of your life. Because while you feel secure, three financial forces are closing in at once, and almost nobody notices until the damage is done. Today I will show you why your 40s can quietly wreck a retirement that looked perfectly on track. So how does the decade that hands you the biggest paychecks of your life end up being the one that breaks the most retirements? It comes down to timing. Your 40s are the only stretch of your life where three separate financial forces line up at the exact same moment. Each one is survivable on its own. Stacked together inside the same 10 years, they build a trap that feels like success right up until the moment it doesn't. Let me start with the part that makes this whole decade so deceptive. Think of the trap as a room that warms 1 degree at a time. Nobody jumps out of a room that is 1 degree too warm. By the time it is genuinely dangerous, you have adjusted to every step that got you there. That slow warming is the illusion of arrival, and it is where everything begins. Earnings for the typical American climb steadily through the 20s and 30s, then peak somewhere in the late 40s and early 50s before flattening out and eventually sliding down. Your 40s sit right at that summit. For the first time, money does not feel scarce. The car is newer. The vacations are real. When something breaks, you fix it without a knot forming in your stomach. Every signal your brain receives says the same thing, that you have arrived, that the hard part is behind you. That signal is only half true, and the missing half is brutal. The income arrived. The discipline that is supposed to ride along with it usually did not. You end up earning like someone who is winning while saving like someone who still has all the time in the world. You do not have all the time in the world. Not anymore. That quiet contradiction sits underneath this entire decade, and it sets up everything that follows. There is a name for the mechanism doing the damage, and it is worth understanding because it is so ordinary. Call it the lifestyle ratchet. A ratchet only turns one direction. When your income rises, your spending climbs to match it almost automatically, and once it climbs, it almost never comes back down. The nicer apartment becomes the baseline you would feel ashamed to leave. The better car becomes the normal you cannot imagine downgrading from. Every increase in income quietly becomes a new floor under your expenses, never a ceiling on them. And a floor that keeps rising is a savings rate that keeps shrinking even while the paycheck grows. Here is the first force, the one that feels the most like a reward. Call it the income peak that lies to you. When the raise hits, almost nobody banks it. The lifestyle rises to meet the income, usually within a month or two. A bigger paycheck becomes a bigger house, which becomes a bigger mortgage, which becomes a bigger property tax bill, and a bigger heating bill and furniture to fill rooms you barely walk into. The promotion becomes a nicer car with a heavier payment. The extra money gets absorbed before it ever has a chance to become savings. Run the math on a single raise and the trap becomes obvious. Say you land a $15,000 raise, a genuinely good year. After taxes, maybe $11,000 of that actually lands in your account. Then the lifestyle ratchet goes to work. A slightly bigger place, a newer lease, a few upgraded subscriptions, a standard of living that nudges up to match the new number. Spread across a year. That $11,000 vanishes into expenses that each felt completely reasonable the day you agreed to them. 12 months later, you are earning $15,000 more and saving exactly the same as before, which for a lot of people is close to nothing. Take someone like Antonio, 44, earning $140,000 a year. On paper, he is crushing it. He also has a mortgage, 2 leased cars, a club membership he uses maybe 4 times a year, and a calendar full of expenses that each made sense in isolation. His income is high. His savings rate is almost zero. And when you total up the typical American household, the debt load now sits near $105,000 across mortgages, cars, cards, and everything else. Antonio is not reckless. He is comfortable, and in your 40s, comfortable is the thing that gets you. The cruelest part is that this force is invisible from the inside. Antonio does not feel like he is in trouble because nothing is on fire. The bill's clear. The lifestyle works. That is exactly why he will not change anything until something forces him to. And something usually does. That brings us to the second force, and this one rarely shows up alone. It is the squeeze. Somewhere in your 40s, the math of your family flips on you. Your kids are still expensive, often the most expensive they will ever be, with activities and braces and the slow-motion freight train of college bearing down. And at the very same time, your parents start to need you. Not always money at first. A ride to an appointment. Help with a confusing form. Then a fall, a diagnosis, a phone call that quietly reorganizes your entire year. This is the sandwich generation, and it is far from rare. Roughly half of adults in their 40s and 50s have a parent aged 65 or older while still raising or financially supporting a child. You get pulled hard from both directions during the precise years you were supposed to be saving the most aggressively. And here is the detail that everyone misses. The squeeze does not just steal time and energy. It reaches directly into your retirement and takes from it. In one study, from 2025, 59% of people caught in that sandwich said they had reduced or outright stopped contributing to their own retirement in order to care for everyone else. Sit with what that actually means. The exact people with the least time left to save are the ones most likely to stop saving at the worst possible moment in the entire timeline. College is where this gets especially treacherous because it forces a choice that feels obvious and is usually wrong. When tuition bills land at the same time you are behind on retirement, the instinct is to put the kids first. Parents pause contributions, drain savings, sometimes borrow against the house, or pull from a retirement account to cover school. It feels like love, but there is a hard truth underneath it that nobody says out loud at the kitchen table. Your kid can borrow for college. They have decades ahead to earn and repay. You cannot borrow for retirement. No bank lends you money to be old. Sacrifice the retirement account to fund the degree, and you have not solved one problem, you have created two. Because now your children inherit the job of supporting you later. Take Wesley, 49, with twins heading to college in back-to-back years. He stopped his retirement contributions cold for 4 years to cover tuition without loans. Noble on the surface. Underneath, he handed away 4 of the most valuable compounding years he had left and put himself on track to lean on those same kids in his 70s. He thought he had the whole story of his finances. The math never included what those 4 years would have become. Now stack on what elder care actually costs, because the numbers are staggering. A private room in a nursing home now runs past $125,000 a year. Assisted living averages around $70,000. A home health aide close to $78,000 a year. These are not extreme scenarios. They are the going rate for help that millions of families will need, and the bill very often lands on the adult child in their 40s or 50s who has the income, the proximity, and the sense of duty. People assume they understand their own finances. Then a parent gets sick, and they discover their plan never had a line for this. Someone like Janelle, 48, actually had a decent plan. Then her mother's dementia accelerated, and within 18 months, Janelle had drained her emergency fund, frozen her own retirement contributions, and started covering memory care costs running past $6,000 a month. She did the loving thing. She also did it during the most expensive, least recoverable decade of her financial life, and not one person warned her those two facts were on a collision course. And here is the part that blindsides families. Medicare, the program nearly everyone assumes will catch them, does not cover long-term custodial care, the daily help with bathing, dressing, and eating that most aging parents eventually need. It pays for short rehab stays, not for years of ongoing assistance. The program that does cover that kind of care, Medicaid, generally requires a person to spend down most of their assets before it ever kicks in. So families find out, usually in the middle of a crisis, that the safety net they were quietly counting on has a hole shaped exactly like their situation. The bill defaults to the adult children. And because it shows up as a moral obligation rather than a line in a budget, people pay it out of whatever is nearest, which is almost always their own savings and their own retirement. You do not get to negotiate with a parent's decline. You just absorb it silently during the years you could least afford to. So you have a force pushing money out through lifestyle and a force pulling money out through caregiving and college, often in the same year. And if those were the only two, you might still survive them. But there is a third force, and it is the quietest and the most expensive of them all. It is the closing window, the math of compounding, working against you for the very first time. For most of your life, time is your single greatest financial asset. $1 invested in your 20s has roughly 40 years to grow, which means most of what it eventually becomes is growth, not the original dollar. That is the magic everyone praises. What almost nobody explains is that the magic has an expiration date, and that date lives right around your 40s. Here is why the timing matters so much. At a reasonable long-run return, money tends to roughly double about every decade. So the dollar you invest at 30 does not just grow, it doubles. And then the bigger amount doubles again, and the even bigger amount doubles a third time before you retire. The last doubling is by far the largest because it is working on the biggest balance. When you delay, you do not lose the small first doubling. You lose that giant final one at the end. You cut off the single biggest stretch of growth there is. Let me put real numbers on it, because this is the figure that should stop you cold. Say you invest $500 a month, growing at about 7% a year, a fair long-run assumption for a diversified stock portfolio. Start that at 42, and by 67, you have just over $400,000. Now take the exact same $500 a month and start it just 10 years later at 52. By 67, you land at only about $160,000. Same monthly amount, same return. That 10-year delay quietly cost you nearly $250,000. And only about $60,000 of that was money you would have actually set aside. The rest was growth you will never get back, because the years that would have grown it are simply gone. That is the kind of number that makes accountants wince. In your 40s, every year you wait does not cost you 1 year. It costs you the most valuable years, the ones at the very end where compounding does its heaviest lifting. And a pause is just as expensive as a late start. Stop contributing for 5 years in your mid-40s, just 5 years to handle a parent or a tuition bill or a rough patch, and the money you skip is not the real loss. The real loss is what those 5 years of contributions would have grown into by the time you retired. For someone setting aside $700 a month, those 5 skipped years add up to around $42,000 of contributions. Left alone to grow, that same stretch would have been worth nearly 4 times that amount by retirement. A 5-year pause in your 40s is not a 5-year setback. It is a 6-figure hole you dig without ever feeling the shovel in your hand. Now hold that against where people actually stand. A common benchmark says that by 40, you want roughly 3 times your salary already invested, and around 10 times your salary by the time you retire. On a $75,000 income, 3 times salary is $225,000 sitting in retirement accounts at 40. The actual median retirement balance for Americans in their late 40s and early 50s sits much closer to $60,000. That is a gap of more than $150,000, opening up at the precise moment the runway gets dangerously short. And because that is the median, half the people in this age group are below even that. They are not behind by a little. They are behind with the clock already running out. So what does it actually take to catch up from there? This is where the bad news and the hope live side by side. A balance of around $60,000 at 50 with 17 years left until 67 grows to roughly $190,000 if you never add another cent. That is not enough to retire on for most households, but layer about $1,000 a month on top of it every month from 50 onward, and you arrive somewhere near $600,000 by 67. That is a genuine retirement, built almost entirely in the back half of a career. The whole thing hinges on one word: onward. It only works if you begin the month you realize the problem, not the month you turn 59 and panic. And the rules are quietly built to help you do exactly this. Once you cross 50, the tax-advantaged room expands on purpose. Precisely so, the people who fell behind in their 40s have a runway to climb back. The runway is there. The only thing that closes it is waiting. Now step back and look at what is really happening across this whole decade, because these forces do not politely take turns. They overlap, and the overlap is where the real damage lives. Go back to Antonio for a moment, because his story is where all three forces meet. The year he turned 46, every one of them arrived at once. His income hit a new high, and the lifestyle ratchet quietly swallowed the raise the way it always had. That same spring, his father had a stroke, and Antonio started covering in home care that ran past $6,000 a month, money that came straight out of the little he was managing to save. And in the background, silent and patient, the compounding window kept sliding shut, charging him for every month the money sat uninvested. No single one of these would have sunk him. He could have absorbed the lifestyle creep. He could have managed the caregiving alone. He could have weathered one slow savings year. But all three landed inside the same 12 months, on the same finite paycheck, during the same decade where there was no longer enough time left to undo any of it. That is the trap. Not one catastrophe, but three ordinary pressures arriving together, each one reasonable, each one survivable on its own, and quietly devastating in combination. By the end of that year, Antonio had less saved than he did at 44, a larger lifestyle to feed, and 7 fewer years until the day he hoped to retire. He never felt a crisis hit, he just felt busy. And busy, in your 40s, is how the most dangerous decade does its quietest work. Here is the question that should be nagging at you by now. If these forces are this predictable, why do so many sharp, capable people walk straight into them anyway? The reason has nothing to do with intelligence. Many who get caught are among the highest earners in the room. What traps them is something far more human. We are wired to react to whatever feels urgent, and almost nothing about this decade feels urgent until the moment it is already too late to fix cheaply. A closing compounding window makes no sound. Nothing flashes red when a savings rate quietly stalls out. That mortgage stretching past your retirement does not feel like a threat on the day you sign for it, because the house is beautiful and the payment fits the budget. Every danger in this decade is silent by design, and silence is exactly what the human brain is worst at reacting to. We evolved to dodge the tiger in the grass, not the slow erosion of a balance sheet across 15 quiet years. A second trap runs even deeper. Admitting you are behind in your 40s can feel like confessing you failed at the one thing you were supposed to have handled by now. So people look away. They promise themselves they will get serious next year, once the bonus clears, once the kids are grown, once life finally settles down. Life does not settle down in your 40s. The pressure only keeps building the same way the math does, and next year tends to arrive already spoken for. Then comes the most seductive belief of them all, the quiet faith that a big enough income will eventually rescue you. It rarely does. Earning more simply widens the distance between what you bring in and what you actually keep, unless something underneath finally changes. This decade is brutal to the comfortable for one reason above all others. Comfort is the thing that convinces a capable person it is finally safe to stop paying attention. The trouble was never a shortage of brains. It was that nothing here ever felt frightening enough to act on until the years that could have rescued them were already gone. If you are getting value out of this, take 1 second and subscribe, because this is the kind of breakdown a lot of channels are too polite to give you straight. I dig into the real mechanics of building wealth every single week, the math nobody walks you through until it is too late to use it. So that is 3 forces draining the same account at once. The thing that holds the whole structure together long enough to truly hurt you is a 4th piece, and it is the one that looks the most like success while doing some of the worst damage. That part is debt. The kind that wears a nice suit and shakes your hand. In your 20s, debt looks like debt. A maxed out card feels like a problem you need to fix. In your 40s, debt dresses up as achievement. The big mortgage is the dream house. The car loan is the reward you earned. The home equity line is just unlocking value you already built. None of it feels dangerous because all of it is attached to things you are proud of. That disguise is exactly what makes it so easy to carry far too much of it. Start with the mortgage, because the timing is the real trap. Take out a 30-year mortgage at 45 at today's rate of around 6.5% and do the simple arithmetic. You will be making that payment until you are 75, 10 full years past the age you are probably hoping to retire, on a loan of around $360,000. You will hand the bank well over $400,000 in interest alone across the life of that loan. The house feels like security. The payment schedule quietly says you will be working to cover it long after the income that justified it is supposed to stop. Then come the cards, and here one specific generation is getting hit the hardest. Gen X, the people sitting right in the heart of this dangerous decade, now carries the highest credit card balances of any age group, around $9,600 on average. That figure has climbed by roughly $2,600 in just 3 years. And at an interest rate now hovering near 22%, a balance like that quietly costs more than $2,000 a year in interest before you knock down a single dollar of what you originally spent. Carry it at a couple $100s a month, and you are looking at nearly 6 years and around $17,000 in total to clear less than $10,000 of original spending. Underneath all of it is one mental habit that makes the entire mess possible, and it is the habit of thinking in monthly payments instead of total cost. The dealership does not ask what the car costs. It asks what payment fits your budget. The lender does not lead with lifetime interest. It leads with a comfortable monthly number. Cash out refinances, longer car loans, equity lines, they all survive on the same trick, shrinking a huge number into a small one you can absorb each month. And once you think in payments, you can be drowning in total debt while feeling perfectly fine on the first of every month. Stack that on top of everything else. Lifestyle creep is draining the raise. Caregiving and college are draining the savings. The mortgage stretches past retirement. The cards bleed interest at rates that would have been illegal a few generations ago. Every single one feels normal. Together, they form a structure that only holds as long as the income holds. And income, it turns out, is the one thing your 40s love to threaten. Which brings us to the shocks. The events you cannot schedule and cannot fully see coming. The first is your own career. There is a quiet truth about getting older in the workforce, and it is uncomfortable. The higher your salary climbs, the more expensive you become to keep, and the harder you are to replace at the same pay if you lose the role. Older workers who get laid off tend to stay unemployed longer than younger ones, and a meaningful share never claw their way back to their old income at all. So the very peak earnings that make your 40s feel safe also paint a target on your back in a downturn, and the recovery, when it comes, often comes at a smaller number than before. Take Roman, 51, a director who assumed his experience made him untouchable. A reorganization erased his department in an afternoon. It took him 14 months to find work, and the new job paid a fifth less than the old one. His expenses, shaped by years of the lifestyle ratchet, did not shrink to match. That gap got covered by savings he could not afford to spend during years he could not afford to lose. The second shock is your health or your family's. A serious diagnosis in your 40s or 50s does two kinds of damage at once. It piles on medical costs, and it can quietly cut your ability to earn at the exact moment the bills spike. Someone like Nadia, 47, healthy her whole life, spent 8 months unable to work after a sudden diagnosis. The treatment was survivable. The financial aftershock, the lost income layered on top of the bills, reshaped her retirement timeline by years. The body that carried you effortlessly through your 30s starts sending invoices in your 40s, and the timing could not be worse. And the third shock is the one people only whisper about. Divorce, so-called gray divorce, splitting up later in life, has been climbing for years. And financially, it is one of the most destructive events that can hit a household. One home becomes two. One retirement account gets divided in half. Two people who spent 20 years building a single future are suddenly rebuilding two separate ones, with far fewer working years left to do it. A breakup at 28 is painful. A breakup at 48 can reset your entire retirement on its own. Before we get to the way out, there is one more pressure worth naming, because it quietly drives some of the worst decisions on this entire list. Call it the comparison tax. In your 40s, you are surrounded by people at the same peak income stage, and almost all of them are spending it. The renovated kitchens, the second properties, the trips that fill your feed. What you never see is their balance sheet, their debt, their empty retirement accounts, the anxiety underneath the highlight reel. So you measure your quiet, responsible progress against their visible, financed lifestyle, and you feel like you are losing. That feeling pushes ordinary people into upgrades they do not need and cannot truly afford, just to keep pace with a race that nobody is actually winning. The comparison tax is paid in real dollars, and in your 40s, the bill runs high. Here is why all of this matters more in this decade than in any other, and it has almost nothing to do with the size of the numbers. It comes down to recovery time. Make a money mistake at 25, and you have decades to absorb it. The market dips, you wait, it recovers, you barely remember the scare. Make the same mistake at 48, and the runway to recover is short and shrinking by the day. There is no 30-year cushion left to smooth it over. Your 40s reserve their harshest penalty for the comfortable, the people who earned just enough to stop paying attention. So that is the danger, laid out in full. Peak income that masks weak saving, a squeeze that drains both money and time, a compounding window quietly slamming shut, debt disguised as success, a comparison tax that bleeds you to keep up, and a row of shocks that hit hardest when you can least afford them. If this is landing a little heavy, good, that tension is the entire point. Because the same decade that creates all of this risk also hands you the single best window you will ever have to fix it. Your 40s are not just the most dangerous decade. They are the last genuinely decisive one, if you treat it that way. So let me turn this around, because awareness without a plan is just anxiety with extra steps. Here is how you take the most dangerous decade and convert it into the one that secures everything after it. The first move is the one almost nobody makes. Treat your savings rate as the actual goal, not the leftover. Saving whatever remains after spending does not work, because in your 40s there is never anything left. The lifestyle ratchet sees to that. So flip the order entirely. Decide the number first, automate it so it leaves your account the day you get paid, and let your lifestyle live on what is left over instead of the other way around. Even a steady 15% of income, including any employer match, changes the entire trajectory. And the tax-advantaged room is generous if you actually use it. In 2026, you can put $24,500 into a 401k. The day you turn 50, that jumps by another $8,000 in catch-up contributions for a total of $32,500 a year. That catch-up window exists precisely because lawmakers know your 40s were probably underfunded. Use it on purpose, not as a panic at 59. The second move is to defend the downside before you ever chase the upside. An emergency fund is not exciting, but in a decade defined by shocks, it is the wall between a bad month and an outright catastrophe. Aim for several months of real expenses parked in a high-yield savings account earning somewhere around 4%. Not the near zero rate a big traditional bank will quietly pay you while using your money. Then look hard at insurance. Term life if people depend on your income. Disability coverage especially, because it protects the asset everything else rests on, your ability to earn a living. These are the unglamorous bets that stop one bad event from erasing 20 years of progress. The third move is to make peace with the squeeze before it arrives at your door. If your parents are aging, have the uncomfortable conversation now, while it is still a conversation and not a crisis in a hospital hallway. Understand what they have, what they want, and whether any long-term care coverage exists, because finding out in the emergency room is the single most expensive way to learn. And hold your own retirement as a hard line, even when it feels selfish. Helping family is honorable. Sacrificing your own future to do it simply manufactures a second person who will need rescuing down the road, usually the very children you were trying to protect. On a plane, they tell you to secure your own oxygen mask first, for a reason that has nothing to do with selfishness. The fourth move is to attack the disguised debt head-on. Run the actual interest math on every balance you carry in plain dollars, because a number that stares back at you hits very differently than a payment buried inside autopay. Knock out the highest rate debt first, which is almost always the cards. Be ruthlessly honest about whether the house and the cars are assets working for you or anchors dragging on you. And the next time a raise lands, route a real chunk of it straight into savings before your lifestyle ever catches a glimpse of it. The raise you do not spend is the only raise that ever actually makes you wealthier. The fifth move sits underneath all the others. Define what enough actually looks like for you in real numbers before the next wave of pressure defines it for you. The reason the lifestyle ratchet always wins is that almost nobody sets a finish line, so every bump in income just becomes a new floor to stand on. Name the number. Know what a secure retirement genuinely requires for the life you want. Then build toward it deliberately instead of drifting and hoping it all works out in the end. None of this is complicated, and that is almost the frustrating part. The moves are simple. What makes them rare is that every one of them requires you to act against the exact feeling your 40s are engineered to produce. The feeling that you have already made it and can finally exhale. Your 40s are not unique because they are hard. Plenty of decades are hard. They are unique because they are unforgiving, because the mistakes you make here do not get the gift of time to heal. Whether this decade builds your future or quietly dismantles, it comes down to one question: whether you saw the forces coming and built on something solid, or whether you just rode the momentum of a good income and assumed it would carry you all the way home. And that is the real divide underneath every story in this video. It is not how much you earn. It is whether you understand the rules of the game you are already playing. Nearly every painful mistake here traces back to the same root: a gap in financial literacy that nobody ever bothered to fill. The basics of how money actually grows, how debt actually works, how time either pays you or charges you interest, depending entirely on when you start. The people who sail through their 40s are rarely the highest earners. They are the ones who learned the fundamentals early and let those fundamentals compound quietly for years. You can watch this divide play out in two people who look identical on paper. Lydia and Curtis both turned 40 earning the same salary, working similar jobs a few streets apart. Curtis treated his 40s like a victory lap. He let the lifestyle ratchet run free, upgraded the house, financed the cars, and told himself he would get serious about saving once the kids were grown. Lydia treated her 40s like the dangerous decade it actually is. She automated her saving first, held her lifestyle flat even as her income climbed, and refused to pause her retirement when the pressure rolled in. Same income the entire way through. By their late 50s, the gap between them has become a different life entirely. Curtis is staring at a mortgage that runs past 70 and a balance that cannot support the lifestyle he built around it. Lydia has options, the quiet kind of freedom that comes from money that grew untouched for 15 years. Neither of them earned their way into those outcomes on salary alone. They decided their way into them, one ordinary choice at a time. During the exact decade, everyone around them was busy feeling like they had already arrived. If any of this hit a nerve, then before you change a single thing, the smartest next step is to make sure the foundation underneath your money is genuinely solid. I put together a full breakdown of financial literacy on this channel, the real starting point for anyone serious about getting their money right, because every strategy in this video only works when the basics beneath it are already in place. Begin there, get the foundation steady, and your 40s stop being the decade that quietly ends you and start being the one that finally sets you up. I will see you in that one.